Well,
Okay.
no, he said to do over 3 years.
We would like to call this meeting to order at 4 o'clock our time, 4:02 as that that clock on the back, but it's 4 o'clock on the dot. So today we are having a comprehensive view of the facilities by Mr. Russ Oaks, who will give us great detail, and maybe even Mr. Dillingham if there's opportunity for you to speak. But more importantly, just thank you for being here and get prepared for great information and ask all your questions. Russ has all the answers.
Well, thank you. First off, I want to apologize. I want to sit here. I'm still breaking in a new knee, and I don't think I can stand
No problem.
up there for
Been
more
there,
than 5 or
done
10 minutes.
Do we
I
have
apologize for sitting behind you.
No, is it, can it go to the room?
It's possible we could try and turn those on, yeah.
Okay.
It'll just help us hear you.
Yeah, let me. Is the key right there? Okay.
Go ahead and get
So,
started.
we'll go ahead and get started. The agenda item says a comprehensive facilities review, and we don't have time for a comprehensive facilities review. So what I've sort of looked at, and I'm going to walk through here, I've put some stuff together to sort of give us some facilities context, to sort of touch on a lot of facilities related things. And I would really like to have a conversation with you all as we go through here. So as questions come up, or you have them, if you'll ask them, pose them. I've got Doug Dillingham, who's our Director of Construction and New Facilities, and also Chris Howe, who's our Director of Maintenance and Operations here too. So I think we can probably, if you ask a detailed question, we may not have a detailed answer, but we can get you a detailed answer. But if you ask a general question, we can probably answer those and work through that. So we'll start with this, work our way through it, and where we're insufficient, y'all pointed out, and we can come back and talk to you later. We'll gather information and send it to you. And can you hear me now?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. So just really some background and context on our facilities. It's no secret we've got about 60,000 students in the school system, and a little more than that when you start counting our pre-K population. But that's up about 10,000 students over the last 15 years. So that's a significant growth for us over that time period. But it's been an incremental growth from year to year. We're not booming in growth. We're consistently growing. We have about 90 different facilities: 16 high schools, 16 middle school, 51 elementary. Elementary includes traditional elementary schools as well as primary and intermediate schools. And then a number of special schools for like the Knoxville Adaptive Education Center, KEC, and Fort Sanders, and several other special schools along that line. And then we've got basically 4 administrative facilities: the AJ building here, the Knox Central building over on Central Avenue that we work out of, the Simpson Center over next door to Dogwood Elementary School, and then Eastport Elementary School, which is the remains of the old Eastport School. It's about a 10,000 square foot facility.
What do we do with that facility?
It's largely storage facility for equipment that our special education staff uses, and it gets checked in and checked out. And we've got some reading equipment and those kinds of things over there. So there's probably a couple of dozen personnel that work in and out of that building. Nobody actually lives. Well, we got about 3 people that live 100% in that building, but the rest are in and out. In schools come in, pick up material, and trade it out. So
Historically, have we been approached about someone wanting to purchase that?
we have
Yeah.
a number. The school was divided about 10 years ago, and KCDC picked up the oldest part of the building, which dated to the 20s, and did some rehab on that, and that is part of their is an assisted living facility that's over there now.
By my house? Oh, you don't know where my house is.
It's
You haven't invited me over.
it's a few blocks up the hill from Vine Middle School. Basically. When you put all of this together, we've got about 11 million square feet that we're responsible for maintaining. 11 million square feet under roof. That also translates into about 1,500 acres of space that we have to maintain, or campus that we have to maintain. The challenge with our schools too is that we have every type of school that you could think of. We've got urban schools, we've got suburban schools, and we've got rural schools of every stripe, because our building stock ranges from brand new to almost 100 years old. So we've got everything that you can think of, and every architectural design and style that you can think of. This next bullet on here is what really drives Mr. Tao's daily activities. We service between 30,000 and 35,000 work orders every year in those 90 facilities, and that's everything from, this is everything that comes through our work order system. We need light bulbs changed, we need major work done in some areas. We've got the plumbing's backing up, or we got a sewer problem, or a water leak. All of those things go through maintenance and operations. They come in electronically. Our folks are dispatched out to handle them. And those 35,000 work orders get dealt with by about 150 craft people.
Yeah.
So we have a small but I think efficient staff, and they've become even more efficient since we've GPSed all of our trucks, and we know where they are and how they can function. I think before we were doing this, we were running about 30 to 32,000 work orders a year, and we're able to get to about 35 last year. So in my mind, just anecdotally, that's the improvement in our efficiency since we went to GPS system. Our average age on our facilities is 54 years old. An average facility probably doesn't actually exist, but that's just the number as you work it and divide it out. Our monthly utility bill, just as an aside, is about $1.5 million. It would be significantly more than that if we hadn't invested so much effort in utility and energy management over the last 10 years. And we have probably offset our costs in the neighborhood of $80+ million over that 10 years. So that's $80 million that we haven't spent, that we would have had to spend had we not done that work. So
how are they calculating it? If you go to, say, Bonnie Kate, and you change out the LED lights, that first year is the savings, but the second year, you can't count that as savings the second year.
No, but you can count it as a cost offset, particularly if it's a cost avoidance. You get a savings in your first year, and then you get a cost avoidance in subsequent years because we don't change our funding or our budgeting for that, because we have to pay for the new equipment coming in.
That's what I did before I retired from my 40-year job there, that plants will not look at cost savings at one time. That's from the year. Mm-hmm. Then after that year, it's, you're back to ground one. You got to go find me more cost savings.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, there's savings and there's cost avoidance, and we're involved in both of those.
So quickly going back to the work orders of the 35,000, does that include tech or just kind of maintenance?
That is what comes through the maintenance department. That does not include what's handled by our IT department.
Okay.
They have a separate work order system that's very similar to this, and I don't have their responses or their workload on top of my head, but they've got about 54 people across the county that do that, and we serve, I want to think, we're probably just computers right now, between Chromebooks and Macs and the PCs, desktops, everything that we've got, we're probably 50,000 plus units that those roughly 50 people.
There's a whole nother department with money. Okay.
Rush, what do you consider maintenance? Are we speaking of facilities in terms of painting, just general repairs? Are we talking about overall maintenance of the interior as well as the exterior. Define maintenance when we speak of facilities, because I
It's-
see some of the dates.
Maintenance is everything that we do to a building to
That's right.
keep it functioning. A lot of it we do ourselves, a significant amount of it we contract out.
Right.
And if we're doing significant work, like painting a building or
That's right.
replacing floors or replacing windows, stuff
Right.
like that, we basically have to get that done over the summer.
Right, that's why I'm
And,
asking.
that's a challenge for us too, because we don't get our funding until July.
Okay, that's
So
the
half-
reason I brought, that's
Yeah,
the reason I'm
because
bringing that
half
up.
the summer's gone by the
Right.
time we get our funding for that fiscal year, so we usually find ourselves working a year behind
That's right.
on
That's
that.
right.
It's not
That's
where we want to be, but it's sort of where we're forced to be.
And I think that's part of the conversation that we need to have, and I don't think people appreciate that school is in session. The months we do large capital maintenance projects in those schools have such a narrow window that affects when classrooms re-engage, and then the time that our operations for
Yeah.
all of those maintenance in these schools
Yeah.
need to be completed.
And I can tell you, one of the strategies that we use to try to help us be more efficient on that is we budget for projects, but fortunately, we are usually able to save money on our budget when we
Right,
do those
okay.
projects. So we save that money from one year to the other. So the money that we save in one year, we are able to spend on next year's projects between May and June, so that we can get a jump start on getting those started, so that we don't always have to wait till the next year. So if we've saved $1 million, $1.5 million, we can use that to pay our bills on our projects in May and June before we get our money in July.
You sent us a list I guess it's 2 years ago, you sent us a list about paving the schools, that the parking lot paving, and it listed priorities for those rates. Can you send that to us? It's not in,
I'll send it to you. I'm gonna get with Chris and update it. We finished 7 or 8 big projects off of that list, several of them in the south part of the county.
yeah, I'd like to see.
One of the challenges we've got is we had to go back and spend almost $500,000 in Farragut last summer to keep the Circle Drive from sliding off of the hill and to fix some safety issues that we had out there, out of that. We've also got something that we need to look at. I think South Doyle Middle School needs some significant work.
Well, I'll bring it up. If you don't, I'll bring it up for you, that they were promised part of this deal, that parking lot would be fixed. Part of the deal that coming out of the BMX deal. So I'm gonna hold them to that.
Well, we didn't make that
I know,
promise.
the mayor.
Let's take that offline, guys. We gotta get through this presentation, so that's a much bigger conversation.
So, anyway, that's what, we can move on a little bit. You know, we talked about, this is another challenge in capital planning parameters, and the challenges that we face is our capital plan is governed by board policy, but it's influenced by what I call board philosophy. And policy tends to be more static. Philosophy can change based on the circumstances and what you're discussing. And an example in my mind of philosophy is when we're talking about building a new school. How big do you build the school? Well, we want to build the school big enough so that it's got room to grow. But there's been a tendency on the board over the last 10, 15, 20 years to like smaller schools if we can. But we know that bigger schools are more efficient and we can deliver services better at bigger schools. But there's also offsets at bigger schools, particularly in the operation of it. The Hardin Valley Elementary School is a very big elementary school, but you can't get near the school between noon and 3 p.m. Down there because of the traffic impact you have. So there's that offset. We built, for years, our approach has been to build schools to add capacity to what we've got, not to build replacement schools. The board elected to build a new elementary school in the Gibbs community a couple of years ago that wasn't necessarily based on that. It was based on geography and travel time and wanting to get an educational facility in that community. So I would say that's not a policy piece, that's a philosophy piece, and where the board wanted to go with that. So we have to keep one foot in both of those areas and work with those. The thing is, policy can evolve and philosophy can evolve and change, but our buildings are permanent. So when we're there, when it's down there, we've got to live with it, and we know we're going to live with it for, in our case, 70 to 100 years in most cases. And I've given you just an example of some of the facilities that we've got that are 90 to 100 years of age or approaching that. And if you look at that list that I put on there, and this, I could add another half dozen in this, that are in this age range, but I just selected these because it sort of represents broadly what our building stock. If you look at these are mostly elementary schools, or they are all elementary schools. They're smaller schools. They're spread throughout the county. They're not all urban schools. Some of them are rural schools. Some of them were rural schools when they were built, and they're suburban schools now, but they still have that rural construction to them. So, I just put that on there, and I illustrate it to say that our older facilities are shared by communities throughout the county. They're not limited in one area. And you look at this and you say, well, gee, why is it that they're all elementary schools? Well, when they were built, they probably weren't elementary schools. They were K-12s or junior, had a broader grade span. I do think it's important, and this is, due to the work of Mr. Tao and his folks, that facility age does not necessarily indicate condition or capacity or the ability of the school, because some of these older schools here are maintained very, very well. And if you haven't been into any of these, I would suggest you get an opportunity, take a look at them and see. I know that we've done significant work in some of these in order to maintain the structure of the facility, and what was it, Bearden Elementary School, I think we went in and had to a couple of years ago, had to tear out all of the joists and the underpinning, go in and replace all of the floors, and we went back in with wood floors like we tore out in order to try to keep the character of the facility as it was built. And we've done that to greater and lesser extent in other facilities. Another dynamic in capital planning that we deal with is, again, people move and our facilities don't. And when people move, one of the things that they consider is, where am I going to go to school? It's a high priority for them. So, they can move into, and we'll have migration or into facilities that begin to stress that facility or the capacity of that facility, and we'll have to do some sort of zoning action or to try to pull that down and back into a facility that may be losing staff or losing student population. And
is there an automatic, is there a schedule for rezoning, or is it as?
There's nothing automatic. Yeah.
No, I know, but I didn't know if it followed a certain cycle, like a charter review, that every 4 years it's reevaluated, or every 10 years it's reevaluated on a comprehensive basis, or?
We try to look at our capacity in our facilities and our enrollment facilities constantly. And the time of year we really, there's 2 times a year that we're really doing it. It's when school starts and right now, because we're in the process of developing capital plans. And the challenge for us is I want everybody to be able to go to school where they want to go to school, but we may not necessarily have the capacity there, or even the ability to create capacity there. Our elementary schools are probably have the least flexibility in their ability to manage the building. They are staffed and enrolled, most of them, much more closely to what their capacity is than are the middle and high schools.
I have a question. One facility that's not on here, I mean, the first district has 16 schools, and Emerald is not reflected on here. How are we measuring the financial impact and the investment that was made in Emerald Charter Academy?
Well, we have made no facilities investment in the Emerald Charter Academy. That's done by the Emerald board themselves.
But we do have a large financial impact in Emerald.
We have flow-through
That's what
funds that we have to provide
Yeah.
to Emerald, and,
We'll get to that. I'll just let you say it.
about $5 million a year. And and I think those they apply largely to their operational expenses, like
That's what I wanted to
staff.
know. Yeah, I
Based
just,
on our per pupil.
Yeah,
perfect, that's what I needed to see.
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Well, and all of this sort of gets us to the next slide here that I want to talk about is facility capacity. And it sounds like a pretty simple concept, but it's anything but. Capacity can be calculated in a lot of different ways, and we try to work with within what are considered really the best practices or of the school facility industry or profession, and if I'm, let me put it this way, if you all really wanted to get into the weeds of this, I've got a spreadsheet that I can share with you, but just so you know, we look at capacity in terms of like maximum capacity. Maximum capacity is really just the number of teaching stations you have times your max pupil teacher ratio. So at high school, it would be, 26 teaching stations times 30, or at elementary school in the primary grades, it would be, 26 times 20. And so that gets you a gross number. And then you have to go in after that to determine what building capacity is, functional capacity, program capacity, temporary capacity. You have to go in and account for things like what your actual pupil teacher ratio is. Because we don't staff all of our schools at the max pupil teacher ratio. And we have elementary schools where the primary grades are staffed at 1 to 20. We have elementary schools where the primary grades may be staffed at 1 to 17. And when you go in and you make that changes the capacity of the building. Particularly at the middle school and high school level, your programming can change the capacity of the building. If you have a very popular band program, it can add capacity to your building as you're putting larger numbers of students to a single teacher. If you've got a number of programs that maybe the principal wants to offer or classes that they want to offer, but they're not filled out. They're not getting 25 or 30 kids. They're getting 15 kids, but it's still a valuable class for those 15 kids. For the semester, you're offering a class that's less than the capacity of that room. You're reducing the capacity of that building. So your capacity will change from semester to semester as your schedule changes and your program changes. So I just say all of this to say, so to help everybody understand is capacity is not simple, and principals always want more, because the more you have, the easier it is to manage the building. And we really we get nervous, Doug and I get nervous when we've got schools that are operating above about what we would call 85% of their capacity, because once you're above that, they lose their freeboard, they lose their flexibility, they've got to max out all of those classroom spaces.
We certainly don't have time to do it today, but I do think if that's something you could send us, then we'd certainly be interested in seeing the spreadsheet. I mean, it's data.
Yeah, and what it will do is basically show you just how the numbers calculate out.
It'd be great to see.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
And Russ, you might get to this on the capacity issue, so if I'm jumping ahead,
Yeah,
tell
go
me
ahead.
wait, but at what point does a school qualify for a portable, I guess, is on the capacity?
I'll tell you how that process works. And
And if you're getting to
and
that
again,
later-
no, it's not in here. There's nothing automatic in that. Basically, the principal will send us a note and say, hey, I think I need a portable. And when you tell us you need a portable, that's basically 2 classrooms that we would provide. Because a principal asks for a portable doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get one. Facilities will get with curriculum and instruction, and we'll send some folks out to assess how the building is being used, and can the building be used more efficiently and effectively than it is, and what do we need to do, and how does the principal envision using that portable, and it's, when we work through that whole process, then between curriculum instruction will make the final decision of whether they need a portable or not, and then facilities will come in and try to facilitate getting that done and getting it put in. So, we've put a portable at Hardin Valley every year for the last 3 years. We'll probably do it again next year.
And can you talk about, I mean, I've heard the cost, but I think I was a little shocked when I found out what the cost of a portable was, because
We, 2 years ago, we were budgeting $200,000 per portable to put in. The portable itself will run us about $100,000. And then, and Doug, you correct me when I get offline here, but I think once we get, then we have to put in walkways and steps and covered walkways and fire alarm systems, and we have to plumb them and put in drains and water and all of that sort of takes up the difference in that. We found out last year that $200,000 wasn't doing it anymore, so we budgeted $250 in the current year. We're looking at budgeting $300 in next year's budget, and the primary reason for that is under the new 2018 International Building Code that was adopted by the county a few months ago. All new portables have to be fully sprinkled, and so that's going to add to the cost of our portables as we do.
and do we have to retro go back to all of them?
We don't have to retro go back unless we do some sort of significant modification to an existing one, but all the new ones have to. Or if we get one and we move it from point A to point B, we'll probably have to do that.
Well, this one I think surprised me was I was like, okay, if a school's not using the portable, just move it to another school, but there's a lot of cost. I mean, the portables.
It
just-
costs
itself
us
is just
almost as much to move a portable as it does to buy one
yeah.
and put a new one in. Yeah, we save what? $40,000-$50,000 maybe on moving one.
Much, it really depends, and it's site specific as far as cost, because when you move in, where are the utilities, where do we have to go to tie in and all of that. Plus, when you're moving one, you have to deconstruct, take all the stuff that you added on and you put it in, deconstruct, then take it apart, move it, and then put it back together and reconstruct all of that. So that's
Okay.
amount of money. There's, I would say, less than $50,000.
Yeah, that's what surprised me. I mean, I was thinking, oh, it's no big deal just to move a portable from one school to another, and then I found out
It is a big
not
deal.
as nothing simple as I thought.
$200,000
Yeah.
And I guess we've pretty much hit most of the bullets on that slide, but one thing I want to say is, talk about it a little bit, is that very last bullet down there is fire codes have very little impact on what the capacity of our facilities are, because if we were looking at what code the fire codes give us, it's a whole lot more than capacity we generate through the pupil-teacher ratios that we work from. We've got, the board has 2 policies that really govern the facilities program, or the capital program, and the policy F100, the facilities expansion program, and F151 is the capital planning program. As we do facilities expansion, the thing that we really want to highlight and make sure that we're applying when we're thinking about new facilities, designing and building new facilities, is simplicity of design. How long, the more simple the design is, the greater the likelihood is that we're going to be able to use it efficiently and effectively for a longer period of time, and it's not too specialized. We've got some specialized facilities, or some facilities that were built to a very specialized design around the county that may have worked great when they were built, but they haven't worked well for us for years. And probably the best example of that right now is Adrian Burnett Elementary School. And but we'll be moving away from that one. We also want to look at the economics of the design. There are, the architects like to build monuments, and we like to build functional facilities, and that helps us keep down the cost of the facility. And then we also want to look at our long-range maintenance costs when we're building a facility. When you put a facility together, there's a lot of things that you can do to save money in the initial construction of the building, and then you turn it over to the owner. And what happens is the owner winds up spending a lot of money in the early years of that building doing maintenance, that if you'd spend a little more money during the construction process in selecting your finishes and your materials and those kind of things, you could eliminate the need for maintenance. And it's probably some of the best examples of that are some of our older facilities where we have glazed tile on the walls, and we have terrazzo floors. All of those things are very expensive when you build the building, but you don't have to paint after you did that, and you don't have to go in and sand floors and replace carpet and do those kind of things. Once that's in, it's pretty much a zero maintenance to you. Now, you don't have to go that far. There are finishes and materials that we use now in our facilities that can get us to close to those levels of maintenance that are not as expensive as that, but we really consider finishes and materials when we're putting a building together, so that when Doug turns it over to Chris, I don't have the two of them coming back to me and beating me up because Chris is having to spend money out of his budget for what Doug didn't spend out of his budget. So it's a challenge. We talk about capital planning, and it's as much art as it is science. And the way we have evolved to this over the last 8 or 10 years is periodically we'll put together a capital planning priorities document that will enunciate, that we ask the board to review and adopt, and it will enunciate what the board's capital priorities are over the next X number of years, whether it's 4 or 5, 6 years. We're currently in the current capital plan finally addressing all of the priorities that were identified in the previous 2 capital planning documents that date back, I think, to 2011. So we didn't create one of those last year or the year before. We're still working off of what was on there. We're probably going to have to look at capital planning priorities and adjust those sometime in the next year or 2 and develop a new document too. And then from that capital planning priorities document is what we build our annual capital plans off of. So we're going to have to address that soon, I think. The capital planning really addresses major new construction needs, or what we think are new construction needs, maintenance upgrades, significant maintenance upgrades to existing facilities, and looking at how we determine what upgrades we need to make to existing facilities. And I think one of the things that clearly speaks to what we look at for existing facilities is the work we did around Lonsdale Elementary School over the past year, as we started getting concerns from the community about 2 years ago about the school and the functionality of the school, and we promised the community that we would go back and do a look at the school And I know that there are a lot of folks out there who tie everything that we're doing to Lonsdale to some natural gas leaks that we had in last year. And really, we have been doing an analysis of that school and looking closely at that school for about 18 months prior to any of those events. And what we look at is what's the condition of the building? How's the building serving the students that are there? Is it meeting the educational requirements of the educational program requirements? Is it, what's the condition of the roof? What's the condition of the electrical? All of those kind of things and put together, and then do sort of a cost-benefit analysis about, can we go in and fix all of these things and get the building to a state that we want, or is it more cost-efficient and more effective to, in some way, replace that building? And one of the things, too, that you have to make the analysis on when you're looking at those facilities is the building code, because if we've got a building that's 70 years old, that building has probably existed through 7 or 8 different building codes. And, we don't go back in and necessarily change everything in the building because a building code changed. The requirement is really, I think it's about, 30%? If we're going to do something, an upgrade or spend something on that building that is roughly 30% the value of that facility, then we have to go back and bring it to the current code as it exists. And and as we found out looking at Lonsdale, there are the codes had changed so much that to bring that building, in some areas it was not possible to bring it to the current code and still maintain some sort of functionality of the building, and then too continue to use the building while you're doing all of this work. And that's also a significant challenge for us too. If you're going to go in and do a lot to a building, how do we do it and continue to use that facility? Because we don't generally have places we can move kids to while we redo their building.
When did we redo Lonsdale? Because when I met 3 years ago, Lonsdale was on the capital plan to be a new school in 2022. Are we still on target to look at that? Because from the date on this, no investment, the last addition and renovation was 1955. I thought we did the kitchen, didn't we make some capital? Okay, that must have been.
Not significant.
Okay.
And that's addition and renovation. We haven't done addition and renovation. We have gone in and upgraded the electrical. We've gone in and all of our schools over the last 7 or 8 years, we have put in a very robust wireless infrastructure and those kinds of things. So we've made those investments, but we haven't done anything significant with the facility. I can tell you that what the county has an RFP on the street right now, or they will very shortly, to identify a contractor for the new Lonsdale Elementary School.
Russ, what about Adrian Burnett?
Doug had a meeting with the architects this morning, so why don't you come up to the lectern and fill us in, Doug?
We went through the RFQ process to identify the architect. We have the approved contract and all that. I met this morning to kind of kickstart the design part of it. We've purchased a piece of property that's adjacent to Adrian Burnett that will help facilitate that. We're still trying to get at least a portion of the swimming pool that's in behind, plus another piece that would really help facilitate the design. So I've asked them to go ahead and start taking a look at the design to see what we could do using the new piece of property and staying off of that swimming pool property altogether. Now, they have agreed to at least sell us the tennis courts back there, which would help, but in the discussion with the architect today, we decided that we will try to design something where the area for the tennis court would just be our side yard setback that would be required by code. And that way we could go, even if we don't get that, we're still moving in a positive direction. So they're putting together a schedule for me to try to make a determination of when and where and all that. Preliminarily, we talked about maybe bringing schematic design to the board in May, get it on the May agenda if we can get all of this worked out. And then, once the board approves schematic design, they'll go into their contract documents. And I would like to actually have it on the streets for bid in October or November, and there's method to my madness on that. Because typically when you start moving into winter months, contractors are a little bit more hungry and they give you better prices. Plus, it's before the first of the year, which is when all your material prices start going up. So,
You've done this a few times.
yeah, it's about 47 years. Yeah, I have done it a few times. So there is a method to all of this, and it may seem like we're stalling it out, but sometimes that's done on purpose, and
Sure.
sometimes it's just a process and having to work through. We've got to hit the architect's schedule. Even though I've reminded them today that our project is the most important one they have in their office, it's not the only one they have in their office.
So when do we look at actually being able to open the school ideally?
If we can get it bid in October, and again, with Adrian Burnett and Lonsdale both, the time is not as critical simply because we do not have a rezoning involved.
Okay. They can open during the middle of the school year.
Exactly, just like Gibbs Elementary School, we moved them in over the long President's Day weekend, which I've sworn.
We'll never do again.
But here, it's just a matter of moving the teachers' things over, and the students' things over. We'll have new furniture and all that inside. So it makes it a little bit easier, so it's not, if we were at a rezoning, we would want to take over the building by July 1, to be able to get furniture in, get it set up and ready to go. But without a rezone, it's not as critical. So, we could move them in over fall break if necessary. Again, since we put liquidated damages in the contractor's contract, they give us the number of calendar days it's going to take them to construct the building based on the documents. So that way, if they don't get it done in time, they can't argue we didn't give them enough time, because they're the ones that gave us the time period. So there's a lot that goes into it that people do not see, do not know, do not understand. And so we would shoot to have it ready by, there's no way we'll have it ready by July 1 of 2021. It's just impossible to do. So then we start looking, okay, do we move them mid-year maybe when they come back? Sometimes I like, if we're moving into a new addition, say around Thanksgiving or Christmas, I like to move them in a couple of days before they go on break. That way the newness is worn off, so that when they come back from break, then you don't have to go through that again, and they're ready to buckle down and start studying hard.
That's a good point.
And I think, too, since we're talking about Lonsdale and on one hand and Adrian Burnett on the other, and you're going to see both of these projects sort of moving side by side as they get built, you'll see two different construction delivery methods being used. We're using the design bid build process, which is the only one that we're allowed to use under law.
We can use design bid build or construction manager agents.
Yeah.
Construction manager.
Yeah.
Agents.
Yeah. So what the design bid build is we employ an architect. They design the facility, and then we bid out and get a contractor to construct that facility. What the county is intending to use on the Lonsdale is the design build process, which means they will put out an RFP for a contractor to come in and take on the project, and then the contractor will engage the architect and put that together. So you'll see us doing two schools side by side, but we'll be with what appears to be different points in the process as we go through it. So we'll have our design probably before they have theirs, but they'll have their contractor before we have ours. So
They will actually start a fast track process. All school projects are required to go through the state fire marshal's office in Nashville, as well as county building codes and the county fire marshal and the health department. So we have a lot of regulatory agencies involved in these. We could do a design bid build fast track, but it's much more difficult to do it because you end up having to bid all these separate packages, and you really have no central point of control that, like you have in design bid build. We hire one architect, we hire one contractor. That contractor is responsible for hiring all of the subcontractors and providing the work. If you go construction management agency, then the board ends up having a separate contract with every subcontractor that's out there. So you end up with probably 30 contracts on a project. And that's what the construction manager is paid to do, is just to manage all of those contracts. But if something goes south, they don't have any skin in the game. Now, there is a construction management at risk, but we're not allowed to do that based on an opinion by the state comptroller. It has to be agency. So we just steer away from that altogether. We've had very, very good success. I've been with the school system going on 19 years now, and we've had very good success with the design bid build process that we use. And everybody says, well, it's automatically controversial because you got your architects versus your contractors. But if you have decent ones on both sides, plus us as an intermediary, we haven't had any problems whatsoever in any of our projects along those lines. They've all run very smoothly. So.
Is Adrian Burnett still going to be an L-shaped type building? Has it changed?
We don't know exactly yet. We had a fairly lengthy discussion this morning about that. They're going to go back. Of course, they did our report on Adrian Burnett, and they put in there a possible design. And of course, the whole thing at Adrian Burnett is building the new one while we're still teaching the old one. And we can't move any of the portables out of the way because we don't have anywhere to put the kids. So they have to stay in place as well. So we're trying to design something that will work around all these things and be able to give us an area where we can provide a physical barrier to keep construction away from kids and all of that. And even, everyone that's on site's been through a background check, so we're not really concerned about that, but just kids wandering into the construction area, and especially the younger ones.
Yeah, and which brings up, why are we doing that? Well, the property's at a premium, and it's difficult to find buildable property in sufficient quantity, and I said this to the board about 2 weeks ago as we're going through the process of trying to identify property for the Northwest Elementary School. We're finding it's really difficult to find a piece of property in that area of the county that is buildable and that has a property owner that wants to sell to us. And so that's ongoing. I think the other thing that we're going to find as we grow over the next decade is we're going to have to look closely at how we do property and consider the fact that we may have to redevelop some developed property, and we may have to buy property that is more expensive than what we are used to in order to get something in an area of the county where we need it. And so that's going to be a challenge to us, and those are going to be some philosophical discussions, I think, that are going to have to be had by the board and the county commission and shared between us and the mayor's office over the next 10 years or so as we look at our building stock and what we do to it. If we've got, and there's been interest by a number of folks in having discussions about some of our older facilities inside the city, some of those that we may have inherited from the city school system, and whether those need to be significantly upgraded or even replaced. And when you look at that, if you're going to replace a facility, I think we would be, and this is again a philosophical discussion that the board would have to have. If I'm going to replace ABC Elementary School with a new ABC Elementary School. I don't want to put it in somebody else's community. You know, if you're going to do it, it probably ought to serve the community that it's currently serving in large part. And if you're going to do that, and if you're in an urban area particularly where you don't have open space, you're going to have to buy something and redevelop it or be creative in what you do. Every one of those things is going to be a different challenge, and it's not necessarily going to be simple. But you know, that's just one of those things that we're going to have to not be shy about talking about in the future, I think. But, so, anything else on that y'all want to talk about before I go to the last slide?
Is Adrian Burnett going to be, the original, be torn down once the new one's built?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so probably that would become like playground space, perhaps?
And parking and drives.
Okay.
Okay, let me, if there are no more questions on that or discussion on that, just talk a little bit, and you all are pretty familiar with how the capital improvement plan gets funded. But I just wanted to put this slide on there to give you some highlights about where the dollars are and sort of remind everybody. Out of the Knox County bonded debt load, the school system currently carries about $383 million of that. So that's what we're paying in debt on. That's the bonds that we're paying off right now. That works out to about $31 million a year for us. And the challenge on that is $11 million of that comes out of our general operating budget. There is, in the ordinance that was set up a number of years ago that drives how the sales tax is used and the amount of sales tax that goes to fund the school system, 11 cents of that is set up to go into the debt service fund. And that 11 cents pays about $19.5 million of the annual debt, and then the remainder of it has to come out of the school's general purpose fund. So, you know, as we get that out, it's not enough to cover what the debt is. And then, you know, y'all talked about this about a year ago as we had Mary Ann Dursky from the state came in and talked a little bit about the BEP. We get $47 million out of from the BEP that is generated through that formula, and it's based largely on square footage per pupil. And so the square footage number they use for us is about 6 million square feet to generate that number. You remember I said we had about 11 million square feet that we're actually
We need some more.
dealing with.
We
Yeah.
need some more.
Yeah. So,
I have a question about
Yes, ma'am.
and you, I think I know this, but I'm not sure. We got $383 million in bonded debt. Is that the last 20 years? Because I'd just like to know that.
Ron's
Is
not
that-
here, Bob, but I think
Is that
normally
right?
they buy or sell 20-year bonds.
I'm-
Yeah. So it's not all the same
That's right.
age. It rolls
That's-
off every year.
where I-
And that's why in the
Correctly.
current capital plan, we were able to adopt it without, pushing up our payments too much, because we've structured what we've got in the capital plan so that we're picking up new debt as old debt
Rolls off. Well, that was where I was headed with that. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know how long we can do that.
Neither do I. That's the
Anyway.
reason I asked
Yes,
that
ma'am.
question. Okay.
Sir.
Going past debt for just a minute, back to the sort of number of facilities. How often is there an assessment done of? We've heard we have too many schools, or we need to consolidate into bigger, more efficient schools and less individual neighborhood schools, things like that. I mean, is that just as an ongoing basis, or is there really a larger comprehensive thought process? Because as we continue to grow, I mean, if we're at 90 facilities now, just adding more and more facilities may not be the answer.
Well, my boss was asked that question a couple of months ago, and I don't know that he liked the way the conversation worked.
I mean, this is the hardest conversation. Rezoning and little tiny neighborhood schools that are 100 years old. This is the hardest thing that you guys do on the school board, but somebody has to tackle it at some point and start really having a bigger conversation, because there's just not that much more money all the time to keep adding we can't have 120 facilities in 20 more years and say, that's just the way it is.
And it comes down, like I said, if you've got an elementary school with 1,200 kids in it, and I'm just talking for Russ Oaks here, and I'm not talking for the superintendent or the Board of Education, but if you've got an elementary school with 1,200 kids in it, it is much more efficient and easier for you to provide services to those kids than it is if you've got an elementary school with 100 or 150 kids in it. And by that I mean they can have a full-time nurse. Mm-hmm. They can have more than one full-time PE teachers. They can have full-time art teachers, and they can have full-time music teachers, and you're not sharing with anybody, and it's easier for the principal to make that manage that building, and it gives you a little more flexibility in managing that building. Now, there are some trade-offs that you're going to get when you do that. I don't think parents are as comfortable in that environment, or some parents are not. I mean, it hasn't kept people from moving to Hardin Valley, but also you have to deal with things like traffic, and particularly at the elementary schools. From my, and I'm not an educator. I've spent most of my life doing various logistics functions, and if you look at it, I'm not sure if I am in the second grade and I'm spending my day with the same 20 second graders, that I have a concept of how big the building is. I just know this is my class, and I'm going to lunch with them, and I'm going to gym with them, and all those things. But adults have a different view of it, and we've got to have those discussions, and how do we go forward?
I agree, but the historical significance of those inner city schools are there for a reason. So the history of desegregation in those city schools and the surrounding communities that they support is going to be a difficult conversation, and the conversation must take place in the scope of the civil rights component, which is why the school system's desegregation ban back in the 90s occurred, and we're still dealing with the effects of those schools, city versus county schools. So the context of that is really what is part of the conversation that must be had, because those schools are there in their specific locations for a reason.
Yeah, I agree with you, and they become part of the fabric of the community. And it's not just the inner city schools. We've got rural schools that are part of the fabric.
That's
of
right.
the
That's what I was
schools.
going to say.
Gap Creek. And
Gap
Fullerton.
Creek is tiny.
Yeah.
And you really, it sort of comes down to a question, do schools get their identity from the community they're in, or does the community get its identity from the school?
Right.
And you could argue either.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's why, this whole conversation is why you can't just look at a percentage and say, oh, we shouldn't have a school that's only 50% capacity. You just can't do that because of all of these conversations. So you really have to look at it individually and by community and by school.
And, I think, Coreyton is an interesting facility in itself, and you're seeing some growth out in that area of the community. The Gibbs Elementary School is picking up enrollment. We've got some room to grow at Ritta, but in my mind, Coreyton is the card we want to keep in our back pocket right now, because if there is additional significant growth out there, Coreyton's got a good-sized campus, and if you need to, you could come in and do a larger school there and build at some point. And I think, sort of aligned to this, as we go forward, we're going to have to look more closely at how do we use the building stock that we've got, and how do we use the campuses that we've got, and maybe we need to come in and do some major reconfiguring on some of them. And I think that's part of the discussion we want to have over the next year or so with the Farragut campuses. Did that answer your question, or did I?
It is. Look, this is a 3-day conversation about schools and zoning facilities, but as you look at the ages of the schools, and a lot of the city-based schools, or former city schools, are the ones that are the oldest, obviously, and you know, the cost of maintenance or upgrade or facility structure, any of the things that you all have to spend money on is gonna, the bell curve goes up the older it gets and the worse it gets. And so where's the tipping point that, you know, you say, look, a school is 130 years old and all we're doing is spending a massive amount of money trying to patch what should have been replaced at age 75, but yet it's a character neighborhood school where nobody wants anything to change ever,
Yeah,
ever, never, generations and generations from now. But
Go
but you
tear down
have to.
Sequoia and see your
Yeah, I mean,
neighborhood burn.
but I mean, there's 100 examples of that, but it's economically to be able to have enough resources to you know, there's only so many resources in the bucket, and the more the costs get, the worse it gets other places, and those are the hard conversations, and when you have huge growth areas, you know, like Hardin Valley, and everybody says it's overcrowded, you know, rezoning could solve that tomorrow, but everybody wants to go to the new school, nobody wants to go to the other school, and so there's ways to solve problems, but it's not when it gets to the point of, I don't want it emotionally. It doesn't make sense logistically. It makes sense logistically, but not emotionally. And that's, I mean, look, this is what you guys work on at the school board, but at the same time, you know, we're the pocketbook, and we have to look at what can we do to invest in better schools, not just the same footprint with more expensive schools. And so,
Well, and this is a conversation that Doug Dillingham and I have had a number of times over the years when we're talking about the condition of a facility and maintaining a facility. You can keep a building viable and usable as long as you're willing to continue to make repairs to it. You know, it can be 200 years old. You can still use it as long as you're willing to continue to make repairs to it. Now, is it economically efficient to do that? It depends on what kind of repairs you're having to make. I think when we're talking about schools, that's one of the considerations you have to account for. But I think a bigger consideration you have to account for is, does it still meet our need to serve our curricular purposes? Is it meeting the educational program? Can we make it meet the educational program, or do we need to abandon it or do something different?
I had one other quick question, if I might. At the beginning of the presentation, you said that your report here says that there's been an increase of about 10,000 students in the last 15 years. Have you all worked with planning to get an estimate of what the next 15, is that another 10,000 in the next 15 years? I know there's always a fall off and a growth, you know, influx, but.
We're working with Knox Planning to sort of change some of our horizons on that as we've done it over the last several years. So we got from Knox Planning back in January their 5-year population projections and student yield projections, and we're working on those right now. The problem with going out more than 5 years for the most part is we were talking then about kids who haven't even been conceived yet, and so it's the further away you get from year one, the more guesswork you've got involved. So we're looking at a 5-year window. What Knox Planning gives us are total population projections and student yields. We know from our own enrollment patterns that we don't get all of the kids in the county. Some of them go to private schools, some of them get homeschooled. We have schools that have almost 100% of the kids in their zone going to the school. We also have schools that only have about 80% of the kids in that zone going to school. So we have to take what we know about ourselves and apply it to the numbers that we get from Knox Planning. And that's where we are in the process right now to get an idea of what we think 2024 will look like. And we haven't in years past gone back and compared what our projections are for 2024 to what we projected in 2023 to see how they changed. but I want to get that process in place so that we can do that, and sort of give us a dipstick of how accurate we are and how things are changing, because we've probably spent too much time looking at the data point as opposed to a series of data points. And one data point is not a pattern. We need to work more to identify the pattern. So we're doing that. We're doing that out of Hyde. I'm not a demographer. We don't have a demographer on staff. It would be nice to have one who can do this kind of stuff full time. But so we're trying to do the best we can.
Well, I have a question for you, since this is a facilities capital planning. Have we looked at, you indicate rural high school, your maintenance that's on Magnolia, your Sears Tower, your Eastport. Have we decided to move to see what the facilities capital plan needs to be? Because these facilities are scattered throughout the city. What are we looking at to build efficiency and maintenance to provide the services, and what does that look like long term? Or we are not there yet?
We're not there yet, and I can tell you we've had some sort of sidebar conversations with county finance office about how some of that goes together, and how does the rural facility get used in the future.
Right.
But I'd say all of that's really preliminary. Anything you talk about is not going to be cheap.
Oh, sure. And I just want to know.
We'd rather spend our money on schools than on
maintenance
maintenance facilities.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
And the other challenge to that is if you're going to consolidate it, it needs to be someplace relatively centrally located where our trucks can be on the interstate in just a couple of minutes.
But those are just preliminary, and we haven't moved to
No, ma'am.
Can I ask you, for our schools that are considered west of downtown, do we have any extra capacity in any of them? Because I feel like all I hear about is the overcrowding in the West Knoxville schools, so I'm just...
What was the question?
In our, what's considered west of downtown, is there any capacity in any of the schools? Because I feel like for the most part I just hear about...
From the K-12, across K-12?
Yeah, even...
88%.
Yeah.
I thought Carnes had some capacity.
Carnes has
88%.
Carnes High School.
has some capacity,
Yes.
but not the middle school.
No.
The middle school has a little bit of capacity right now because we did the rezone to Hart Valley Academy. But it'll grow back into itself. It's not something.
Well, I mean, and that's the only thing I think about, like with rezoning, when you talk about it, it's not so easy because when you get like west of downtown.
I'm not
I
assuming
mean, unless,
it's easy.
yeah,
And that's
Well, I
the
mean,
thing that I was gonna say with the
unless-
elementary schools.
yeah, unless you
They're
get
all
into like
overcrowded.
major busing across our county, which is gonna be a whole nother thing. There's not, where our growth is really West Knoxville.
Yeah.
And there's not a moving this pocket to this pocket to solve a problem. So
Yeah.
it's really in the West Knoxville, unless you add capacity, we're not having right now additional capacity to really do that, which I think is one of the problems you're ending up in.
Yeah.
That, different areas.
I mean, that's the point I wanted to make, Virginia. Even if you look at North Shore, I mean, they're over capacity. So, I
And
mean,
it's a new school.
it's a brand new, I mean, not brand new, but it's a new school. So there's, Bluegrass has a little bit of space, but you'd have to start feeding the kid lunch at 9 a.m. instead of 10.
Well, and I look at
instead of 10.
some
So,
of-
Are you looking at that sheet I sent you a few weeks ago?
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I look at some of like in the West Knoxville, like my area of town, when you talk about smaller schools and you get like a Sequoia, Bearden Elementary and Rocky Hill, well, maybe you could put those together, but where there's no property that would do a big school, because you're already kind of in very developed areas. So even if you tried to get better capacities or efficiencies, to me, with some of these smaller schools, they're built in areas where would you put it? Where would you put a
Well,
1,200-person school?
This is something I don't think you can solve one school at a time.
Yeah.
It's something that if you're going to address that, you need to look holistically at the whole region and say, how do we address that? And if we're going to build in one place, how does it affect another place? And if we can build, can we then go back and empty a school, repurpose that school, do something significant there, and then bring it back into service? And how do you do that?
It's just complicated, isn't it?
It's complicated and it's incredibly emotional. And the, you know, I remember 4 or 5 years ago, we were having some discussions with some of the folks from the finance office at Pilot Oil. And they were talking about, well, you know, if we've got a convenience store that's not performing or not doing what we want to do, we just close it. Well, there's not an emotional investment. with
Because you lay off
community.
5 people, big deal.
Yes, ma'am. So and that's what we got to overcome, and you all, you know, both bodies become the brunt of those discussions when we have those.
We appreciate your work.
Does anybody have any other questions? I think everybody could walk away from this meeting having great appreciation for what you all do and having a greater appreciation for how big and complicated the problem is. And I think that really the point of when we set the agenda was this is something we hear a lot, but we don't have a lot of data and understanding of it. And so it's good to sort of get a bigger picture view, and I appreciate the time.
One is, what, as we're wanting economic development and growth for our community, there's also the complication of how do you educate this
That's right.
growth?
That's right. It's not it's pull a string on the sweater, but we'll figure it out. Does anybody have any other business to add to today's program? Thank you for the team as well. Our next meeting is
April 15th.
April 15th.
Tax day.
We, I believe that is all dedicated to budget. Is that, am I rendering that correctly? It's all finance and budget?
Be a good time to talk about it.
It was one, I know one of them, the next one is the safety.
Safety,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I think so, budget.
But I don't think that's the April one.
Yeah,
Okay.
And what time are we, 4 o'clock?
yes, ma'am.
So, thank you all very much, and this concludes the Joint Education Committee.
Thank you, thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Have a great day.